The morning sun cast long shadows across the Norfolk Naval Base as Commander Sarah Mitchell walked through the corridors of the administrative building. Her crisp white uniform bore the insignia of her achievements, but today felt different. Today she would face Admiral Harrison Burke, a man whose reputation preceded him like a storm front. Sarah had been summoned to the Admiral's office for what was officially called a routine performance review. However, everyone on base knew that Burke's reviews were anything but routine. He was known for his sharp tongue, his dismissive attitude toward female officers, and his belief that women had no place in combat roles. As she approached the oak door with Admiral Burke engraved on a brass nameplate, Sarah straightened her shoulders. She had served her country with distinction for 12 years, earning her commander rank through merit, not favoritism. Her service record spoke for itself, but she knew that wouldn't matter to Burke. The secretary, a young petty officer with nervous eyes, gestured toward the door. "The Admiral will see you now, Commander Mitchell." Sarah knocked twice and entered. The office was spacious, with maritime paintings covering the walls and a large American flag standing proudly in the corner. Behind an imposing mahogany desk sat Admiral Burke, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and cold blue eyes. He didn't look up from his paperwork immediately, a calculated move to assert his dominance. "Sit," he said without raising his eyes. Sarah took the chair across from his desk, maintaining perfect posture. She had dealt with men like Burke before, officers who saw her gender before her rank or achievements. She remained silent, waiting for him to begin. Burke finally looked up, his expression showing mild interest mixed with disdain. "Commander Mitchell," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I've been reviewing your file." "Yes, sir. Impressive record, I'll give you that." His tone suggested the opposite. Combat deployments, commendations, leadership roles. He paused, studying her face. "But I have concerns." Sarah kept her expression neutral. "What concerns, sir?" "The nature of your assignments. You've been given roles that traditionally belong to male officers. Combat positions. Leadership of mixed-gender units." He tapped his pen against the desk. "Some of my colleagues think you've been fast-tracked." The implication was clear, and Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly. "My assignments have been based on performance evaluations and mission requirements, sir." Burke's lips curved into what might charitably be called a smile. "Performance evaluations can be subjective. What matters is real-world effectiveness." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Commander, in all your deployments, how many enemy combatants have you personally eliminated?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah recognized it for what it was, a challenge designed to diminish her accomplishments. Burke expected her to stumble, to admit she had never taken a life, to prove his point that women weren't suited for combat roles. "Sir, the specific details of combat operations are classified," Sarah replied carefully. "This is a closed-door session, Commander. I'm your superior officer conducting a performance review. Answer the question." His voice carried the weight of authority and threat. Sarah met his gaze steadily. She had anticipated this moment, this test of her resolve and credentials. She knew that her answer would define not just this conversation, but potentially her entire future in the Navy. "With respect, sir, I believe my combat effectiveness should be measured by mission success rates, unit cohesion, and strategic outcomes, not by individual elimination counts." Burke's smirk widened. "How diplomatic. But that's not what I asked." He stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You see, Mitchell, leadership in combat requires a certain understanding, a knowledge of what it means to take a life, to make split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies." He turned back to face her. "I've eliminated 37 enemy combatants during my career. Each one was necessary. Each one taught me something about command, about the weight of responsibility." His eyes glittered with challenge. "So I ask you again, how many kills do you have?" The office fell silent except for the distant sounds of base operations filtering through the windows. Sarah could hear the rumble of aircraft, the shouts of drill instructors, the everyday sounds of military life continuing outside this confrontation. She understood now that this wasn't really about her service record or her qualifications. This was about Burke asserting his worldview, his belief that women were inherently unsuited for positions of real authority in the military. He wanted her to feel inadequate, to question her own capabilities. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "I notice you're asking about individual eliminations, as if that's the primary measure of a naval officer's worth." "It's certainly one measure," Burke replied, returning to his seat. "Perhaps the most important one for someone in your position." "And what position is that, sir?" "Someone who's been recommended for promotion to captain." Burke opened her file again, his expression showing surprise at her question. "Don't tell me you didn't know. Your name is on the list for the next promotion board." Answer felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She hadn't known about the recommendation, but it explained this meeting. Burke was trying to derail her promotion by questioning her combat experience and, by extension, her fitness for higher command. "I wasn't aware, sir." "Well, now you are, and now you understand why this conversation is necessary." Burke leaned forward again. "The Navy is changing, Mitchell. Some say it's progress. Others say it's political correctness run amok. But one thing hasn't changed: the need for officers who can make the hard decisions." He gestured toward the paintings on his walls, depicting naval battles from various eras. Every one of those engagements was won by officers who understood that sometimes violence is the only solution. Officers who had personally experienced the reality of taking an enemy's life. Sarah followed his gaze to the paintings, recognizing famous battles from the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War II. She understood military history as well as anyone, had studied the great naval commanders and their strategies. "Sir, those battles were won by officers who understood strategy, logistics, and leadership. The individual elimination count of any single officer was rarely the determining factor." "True," Burke conceded. "But those officers had proven themselves in combat. They had demonstrated their willingness to do what was necessary." He fixed her with his stare again. "So, for the third time, Commander, what is your personal elimination count?" Sarah realized that continuing to evade the question would only make her appear weak or evasive. Burke had maneuvered the conversation to this point deliberately, and she had to respond directly. "Sir, my elimination count is classified information that I cannot share without proper authorization." Burke's expression showed satisfaction, as if he'd scored a point. "Classified or non-existent?" He made a note in her file. "Because if you had significant combat eliminations, they would be reflected in your commendations and service records. And while your record shows exceptional performance, it's notably light on direct combat achievements." The implication stung because it contained a grain of truth. Sarah's deployments had often involved support operations, logistics coordination, and strategic planning rather than direct combat, not because she was incapable, but because those were the roles where her skills were most needed. "Sir, my assignments have been determined by mission requirements and my expertise in naval operations and personnel management." "Expertise that doesn't include eliminating enemy combatants," Burke said with finality. "Which brings us to the heart of the matter." He stood again, this time moving to a display case containing various medals and commendations from his own career. "The Navy is considering promoting you to captain, which would put you in command of significant naval assets and personnel. Ships, submarines, aircraft, weapons of war." He picked up one of his medals, examining it in the light. "How can I, in good conscience, recommend someone for such a position if they've never proven themselves in actual combat?" Sarah felt the weight of the moment. This was the crux of Burke's argument, the foundation of his objection to her promotion. In his view, leadership required proven lethality, and without a confirmed elimination count, she was unqualified for higher command. "Sir, with respect, the modern Navy requires diverse skill sets. Strategic thinking, technological expertise, personnel management, and diplomatic capabilities are all crucial for effective command." "All important," Burke agreed, returning to his desk. "But secondary to the fundamental requirement of a military officer, the willingness and ability to use lethal force when necessary." He sat down and opened her file to a specific page. "I see here that during your deployment aboard the USS Lincoln, you served as executive officer during a counter-piracy operation off the coast of Somalia." "Yes, sir. Several pirate vessels were neutralized and hostages were recovered." Burke looked up from the file. "But according to the after-action report, you weren't involved in the actual combat phase." I was coordinating the operation from the command center, sir, ensuring proper communication between units and monitoring strategic objectives, while other officers engaged the enemy directly. Burke made another note. It's a pattern I see throughout your record, Mitchell. Always in support roles, never at the point of contact. Sarah felt her frustration building but kept her voice level. Sir, effective naval operations require coordination between multiple units. Command and control functions are critical to mission success. No one disputes that. But they don't demonstrate combat leadership. Burke closed the file with a snap. A captain must be able to make life-and-death decisions under fire. How can you do that if you've never been tested in actual combat? The question hung between them like a challenge. Sarah understood that her response would determine the direction of her career. Burke had crafted this moment carefully, building to this confrontation where her lack of direct combat eliminations could be used to question her fitness for promotion. She thought of the countless hours she had spent studying military history, tactics, and strategy. She considered her years of service, her dedication to the Navy and her country, her proven ability to lead and inspire others. All of it was being reduced to a single metric: how many people she had killed. Sir, she began carefully, I believe effective leadership is demonstrated through successful mission outcomes, not individual elimination counts. My record shows consistent success in achieving strategic objectives while minimizing casualties on both sides. Burke's smirk returned. How noble. But war isn't noble, Commander. It's brutal, messy, and final. Officers who haven't experienced that reality firsthand are operating from a position of theoretical knowledge rather than practical understanding. He stood once more, this time walking around his desk to stand closer to her chair. Let me tell you about my first kill, Mitchell. Bosnia, 1995. I was a lieutenant commander aboard a destroyer, providing support for ground operations. We encountered hostile forces attempting to establish a rocket position. Burke's voice took on a distant quality as he recalled the memory. I had to make a split-second decision. Engage or allow them to complete their setup and potentially kill American soldiers. I ordered direct fire on their position. He paused, his eyes fixed on something Sarah couldn't see. 17 men died in that engagement. 17 fathers, brothers, sons. I watched the explosions through binoculars, saw the secondary fires, knew that my order had ended their lives. Burke returned his attention to Sarah. That experience changed me, Commander. It taught me the true weight of command, the responsibility that comes with the power to take life. Every decision I've made since has been informed by that understanding. And Sarah listened to his account, recognizing both the gravity of his experience and the trap he was setting. He wanted her to admit that she lacked similar experience, that she had never faced such a moment of ultimate responsibility. Sir, I understand the weight of command and the responsibility that comes with it. My training and experience have prepared me for those situations should they arise. Training, Burke repeated dismissively. Simulations and exercises. But you've never actually given an order that you knew would result in someone's death. You've never watched the light go out in an enemy's eyes knowing you caused it. His words were designed to make her feel inadequate, to highlight what he saw as a fundamental gap in her experience. Sarah realized that no amount of logical argument would satisfy him. He had decided that combat eliminations were the ultimate test of military leadership, and her lack of them disqualified her in his view. Sir, if you're questioning my ability to make difficult decisions under pressure, I'd like to reference the incident during my second deployment aboard the USS. I'm not questioning your decision-making ability in general, Commander, Burke interrupted. I'm questioning your qualification for promotion to captain based on your lack of combat experience. He returned to his chair and picked up his pen, which brings us back to my original question. For the fourth time, what is your personal elimination count? The repetition of the question felt like an interrogation technique, designed to break down her resistance and force an admission of inadequacy. Sarah understood that she had reached a decision point. She could continue to deflect, which would likely result in Burke using her evasiveness against her, or she could answer directly and face whatever consequences followed. She took a deep breath and met his gaze steadily. Sir, my elimination count is 0 confirmed kills in direct combat engagement. Burke's expression showed satisfaction, as if he had finally extracted the confession he wanted. He made a lengthy note in her file, taking his time with each word. Thank you for your honesty, Commander. It confirms what I suspected. He looked up at her with what might have been sympathy if it weren't so clearly calculated. You understand, of course, that this creates serious questions about your readiness for promotion. Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The admission was out, and she could no longer hide behind bureaucratic language or classified information protocols. But she also felt a sense of clarity, as if the pretense had been stripped away and the real conversation could finally begin. Sir, I believe my service record demonstrates readiness for increased responsibility through numerous other metrics. Perhaps, Burke acknowledged. But the promotion board will want to understand why an officer with 12 years of service has never engaged in direct combat. It suggests either a lack of opportunity or a lack of courage. The accusation of cowardice hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Sarah felt her composure crack slightly, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Sir, my assignments have been based on the Navy's assessment of where my skills could best serve mission objectives. I've never refused a combat assignment or requested transfer away from dangerous situations. But you've also never volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, have you? Burke consulted her file again. No requests for transfer to active combat zones. No applications for special operations units. No indication of desire for frontline service. Sarah realized that Burke had thoroughly researched her career, looking for any evidence that she had avoided combat situations. His questions weren't random. They were part of a systematic attempt to build a case against her promotion. Sir, I've served where ordered and performed every assigned duty to the best of my ability. Commendable, Burke said without sincerity, but it doesn't answer the question of whether you have the killer instinct necessary for senior command. The phrase, killer instinct, revealed the core of Burke's philosophy. He believed that effective military leadership required not just the willingness to order others into harm's way, but personal experience with taking life. In his view, officers who hadn't killed were incomplete, lacking a crucial understanding of their profession. Sarah understood that she was fighting against decades of military tradition and cultural bias. Burke represented an old-school view that saw combat experience, particularly killing, as the ultimate test of military worthiness. Her arguments about modern warfare, strategic thinking, and diverse skill sets were falling on deaf ears. The office fell silent again as Burke continued making notes in her file. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sounds of base operations. She wondered how many other female officers had sat in this same chair, facing this same challenge, watching their careers hang in the balance based on criteria that seemed designed to exclude them. Sir, she said finally, if I may ask how many of the male officers recommended for promotion to captain have personal elimination counts. For the first time in the conversation, he seemed caught off guard. That's not relevant to this discussion, Commander. With respect, sir, if elimination counts are crucial for promotion to captain, then it seems relevant to understand the standard being applied to all candidates. Burke set down his pen and studied her face. Are you suggesting that I'm applying a different standard to you because you're a woman? And the question was loaded with potential consequences. Accusations of gender discrimination were serious matters in the modern military, but they were also career killers for officers who made them without ironclad proof. Sir, I'm asking whether the same criteria are being applied to all promotion candidates. Burke's smile was thin and cold. Commander Mitchell, I evaluate all officers based on their readiness for increased responsibility. If you're implying bias, I'd suggest you be very careful about making such accusations. Sarah understood the warning she had pushed as far as she could without crossing into dangerous territory. Burke held all the power in this situation, and antagonizing him further would only hurt her cause. I'm not making accusations, sir. I'm trying to understand the evaluation criteria so I can address any deficiencies in my record. Burke seemed satisfied with her retreat from the discrimination issue. The criteria are straightforward, Commander. Combat experience, leadership under fire, and proven ability to make lethal decisions when necessary. He reopened her file and flipped through several pages. Looking at your record, I see excellent performance in support roles, strong administrative capabilities, and positive evaluations from superiors. But I don't see evidence of the combat leadership that's required for captain. Sarah felt the conversation slipping away from her. Burke had successfully framed the discussion around criteria that favored his worldview and disadvantaged officers like her who had served primarily in support roles. Sir, if combat experience is the primary requirement, perhaps I could request assignment to a combat unit to gain that experience. Burke's laugh was harsh and dismissive. Commander, you're 34 years old with 12 years of service. Most officers gain their combat experience as junior officers, not as senior commanders seeking promotion. The age factor was another obstacle Sarah hadn't fully considered. Burke was right that most combat experience came early in an officer's career. By the time officers reached her level, they were typically moving into more strategic roles that didn't involve direct combat. Sir, my understanding is that the modern Navy values diverse experience and strategic thinking alongside combat experience. The modern Navy, Burke repeated with disdain. Yes, we've heard a lot about the modern Navy and its emphasis on diversity and inclusion. But when ships are under fire and lives are on the line, those modern concepts don't matter. What matters is having officers who understand the reality of war. Sarah recognized that Burke was revealing his broader opposition to changes in military culture and demographics. Her case was part of a larger battle he was fighting against what he saw as the feminization and weakening of the armed forces. Sir, with respect, diversity of experience and perspective can strengthen military effectiveness. Different backgrounds and skill sets can contribute to mission success in various ways. Burke's expression hardened. Commander, this isn't a sociology seminar. This is the United States Navy, and our mission is to fight and win wars. That requires officers who have proven themselves in combat, not officers who have theoretical knowledge about leadership and strategy. The conversation had reached an impasse. Burke had made his position clear. In his view, Sarah's lack of combat eliminations disqualified her for promotion, regardless of her other qualifications. No amount of argument about modern warfare or diverse skill sets would change his mind. Sarah realized that this meeting had been predetermined in its outcome. Burke hadn't called her in to conduct a fair evaluation. He had called her in to build a case against her promotion. The questions about elimination counts were designed to expose what he saw as a fundamental weakness in her record. Sir, I believe my service record demonstrates readiness for increased responsibility, even without direct combat eliminations. Burke closed her file with finality. Commander Mitchell, I appreciate your confidence in your abilities. However, my recommendation to the promotion board will reflect my assessment that you lack the combat experience necessary for senior command. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had known this might be the outcome, but hearing it stated so directly was still devastating. Years of dedicated service, excellent evaluations, and proven leadership were being dismissed because she hadn't killed anyone. Sir, I hope you'll also consider my other qualifications and achievements in making that recommendation. I'll provide a complete assessment, Burke said without warmth. But my primary concern remains your lack of combat experience and proven ability to make lethal decisions under pressure. Sarah understood that the meeting was essentially over. Burke had made his decision, and nothing she could say would change it. He had succeeded in reducing her entire career to a single metric elimination count and finding her wanting. As she prepared to leave, Sarah felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and determination. She had faced discrimination before and overcome it through hard work and persistence. This would be another challenge to overcome, another barrier to break down. But for now, she had to accept that Admiral Burke held her future in his hands, and he had made it clear that future looked dim. The smirk on his face as she stood to leave told her everything she needed to know about his recommendation to the promotion board. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Sarah alone in the corridor with her thoughts and the weight of an uncertain future. 3 days had passed since Commander Sarah Mitchell's devastating meeting with Admiral Burke. She sat in her small apartment near the Norfolk Naval Base, surrounded by stacks of personnel files, promotion records, and statistical reports she had quietly gathered from various administrative contacts. The coffee had grown cold hours ago, but Sarah barely noticed as she pored over the documents spread across her dining room table. What she was discovering made her blood run cold. Admiral Burke wasn't just questioning her qualifications. He was systematically blocking the promotions of female officers across multiple commands. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Female officers with exemplary records were consistently rated as lacking combat readiness or needing additional field experience in their evaluation reports. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Commander Jennifer Walsh, an old friend from the Naval Academy. "Can you meet tonight? I have information you need to see." They met at a quiet restaurant off base, one frequented by military families but far enough from Norfolk to avoid casual encounters with other officers. Jennifer arrived first, her usually confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy. When Sarah sat down across from her, Jennifer immediately leaned forward. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you could end both our careers if it gets out." Sarah studied her friend's face. Jennifer was one of the most level-headed officers she knew, not given to drama or exaggeration. "What's going on, Jen?" Jennifer glanced around the restaurant, then pulled a manila envelope from her bag. "I work in personnel administration now, remember? I have access to promotion board records, evaluation statistics, things most officers never see." She slid the envelope across the table. "After hearing about your meeting with Burke, I started digging. What I found is bigger than just your case." Sarah opened the envelope and found computer printouts filled with numbers, charts, and statistical analyses. At first glance, it looked like routine administrative data, but as she studied the figures, a disturbing pattern emerged. "These promotion rates," Sarah said quietly, scanning the numbers. "Female officers are being promoted at significantly lower rates in Burke's areas of influence. And look at the reasons cited for denial or deferral." Jennifer pointed to a column of coded explanations. Lack of combat experience, insufficient field leadership, need for additional operational deployment. The same phrases appear over and over. Sarah felt a chill as she recognized some of the language Burke had used with her. How many cases are we talking about? Over the past 3 years, Burke has influenced or directly controlled promotion decisions for 47 female officers eligible for advancement to commander or captain. 31 were denied or deferred. The numbers were staggering. A 66% denial rate for female officers under Burke's evaluation was far beyond statistical probability. Sarah realized she wasn't dealing with individual bias. This was systematic discrimination on a massive scale. "Jen, this is explosive. If these numbers are accurate, they're accurate. I've triple-checked everything." Jennifer's voice was tense. "But there's more. Burke isn't working alone." She pointed to another section of the data. Captain Morrison in San Diego, Admiral Peterson in Jacksonville, Commander Bradley in Portsmouth. They're all using similar language, similar denial rates for female officers. Sarah stared at the documents, her mind racing. What Jennifer was describing wasn't just individual prejudice. It was an organized effort to limit female advancement in the Navy. How is this possible? Don't we have oversight mechanisms, equal opportunity policies? Jennifer laughed bitterly. On paper, yes, but promotion boards are subjective. Officers like Burke can frame their objections in terms of combat readiness, operational experience, leadership qualities. It's hard to prove discrimination when the language sounds professional and military appropriate. Sarah continued studying the data, noting patterns in timing, geographic distribution, and affected career fields. The discrimination was sophisticated, carefully designed to appear legitimate while systematically excluding female officers from senior positions. What about male officers? Are they being held to the same standards? Jennifer flipped to another page. That's the smoking gun. Male officers with similar records, similar lack of direct combat experience, are being promoted at normal rates. The combat experience requirement is only being applied consistently to women. The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and rage as she realized the scope of what they had uncovered. Her confrontation with Burke wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a deliberate campaign. "Jen, why are you showing me this? You could get in serious trouble for accessing these records." Jennifer met her eyes steadily. "Because someone needs to do something about it. These are good officers, Sarah. Women who've dedicated their lives to serving this country, and they're being systematically shut out of leadership positions." Sarah closed the envelope, her mind already working on implications and possible actions. "What do you think should happen with this information?" "I don't know. That's why I brought it to you. You're the one Burke targeted most recently. You have standing to file a complaint." Sarah considered the suggestion. Filing a formal discrimination complaint would trigger an investigation, potentially exposing the entire network Jennifer had identified. But it would also end her own career regardless of the outcome. Officers who filed discrimination complaints rarely survived professionally, even when they were proven right. There has to be another way, Sarah said. Something that addresses the problem without destroying everyone involved. Sarah, these guys aren't going to stop on their own. They believe they're protecting the Navy from what they see as declining standards. In their minds, they're patriots. As they talked, Sarah noticed another couple at a nearby table. The man was in Navy dress uniform, ribbons indicating deployment experience and combat service. He kept glancing in their direction, and Sarah wondered if he was trying to overhear their conversation. "We should go," she said quietly. They paid the check and walked to their cars in the parking lot. The evening air was warm and humid, carrying the salt smell of the nearby ocean. Norfolk was a Navy town through and through, and Sarah wondered how many of the people around them were connected to the institution she was now questioning. "Sarah," Jennifer said as they reached their vehicles, "I need to know what you're planning to do with this information. My career is on the line too." Sarah understood the position her friend was in. Jennifer had taken enormous risks to gather this evidence, and she deserved to know how it would be used. "Give me a week to think about it. I need to understand all the implications before we do anything irreversible." 1 week. But Sarah, while we're thinking about implications, other female officers are having their careers destroyed. Every promotion board that meets, more women get eliminated from consideration for senior positions. The drive back to her apartment gave Sarah time to process what she had learned. The Navy she had served faithfully for 12 years was systematically discriminating against officers like her. The institution she had devoted her life to was betraying the principles it claimed to represent. But she also understood the complexity of the situation. Filing a discrimination complaint would trigger a media firestorm, congressional hearings, and massive internal upheaval. It would damage the Navy's reputation and provide ammunition to critics who claimed the military was plagued by institutional sexism. On the other hand, staying silent meant allowing the discrimination to continue. More female officers would see their careers derailed, their contributions dismissed, their potential wasted. Back in her apartment, Sarah spread Jennifer's documents across her table again, this time studying them with a strategic eye. If she was going to act on this information, she needed to build an airtight case that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. She started by creating a database of the affected officers, cross-referencing their records with promotion outcomes. The pattern became even clearer when she organized the data systematically. Female officers were being held to standards that weren't applied to their male counterparts. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her analysis. The caller ID showed her mother's number. "Hi, Mom." "Sarah, honey, you sound stressed. Is everything okay?" Sarah's mother had always been able to read her emotions, even over the phone. "Just work stuff, Mom. Nothing I can't handle. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? I may not understand all the military details, but I understand when my daughter is facing a difficult decision." Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time since her meeting with Burke. Her mother's support meant everything, but she couldn't burden her with the full scope of what she was facing. "I'm dealing with some workplace issues. Discrimination stuff. It's complicated." Her mother's voice hardened. "Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell, you have never backed down from a fight when you knew you were right. Don't start now." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with her mother sharing stories from her own career as a teacher, times when she had faced discrimination and had to choose between speaking up and keeping quiet. "The thing is, honey, you can live with the consequences of fighting for what's right. It's much harder to live with the consequences of staying silent when you could have made a difference." After hanging up, Sarah returned to the documents with renewed focus. Her mother was right. She had never backed down from a fight when principles were at stake. This situation was bigger than her own career or her own promotion. She began drafting a comprehensive report documenting the pattern of discrimination Jennifer had uncovered. The report needed to be precise, factual, and impossible to dismiss as the complaints of a disgruntled officer. As she worked late into the night, Sarah realized she was crossing a point of no return. Once she put these accusations in writing, there would be no going back to her previous life. She would become a whistleblower, a troublemaker, someone who had challenged the system from within. The next morning brought a call from an unexpected source. Captain Rebecca Torres, an officer Sarah knew by reputation but had never worked with directly, asked to meet for lunch. "Commander Mitchell, I hope you don't mind the presumption, but I heard about your meeting with Admiral Burke. I think we need to talk." They met at a small cafe downtown, away from the base and the military community. Captain Torres was a striking woman in her early 40s, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. She was also one of the few female captains in the Atlantic Fleet. "Sarah, may I call you Sarah? What I'm about to tell you stays between us unless you decide otherwise." "Understood?" Sarah nodded, intrigued by the captain's approach. "I went through my own version of what you experienced with Burke. It's about history kept in for Procrascus. About history, please, for considering what the expectations of my particular sisters when they seize some hours. This is the book. It's about history. 3 years ago, when I was being considered for promotion to captain for Kurtaski, Torres stirred her coffee thoughtfully. The elimination count question, the combat readiness concerns, the subtle implications that I wasn't qualified for senior command. How did you get promoted?" Torres smiled grimly. "I got lucky. The admiral questioning my qualifications was transferred before the promotion board met, and his replacement took a different view of my record. But it made me aware that there was a systematic pattern." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Sarah, there's a network of senior officers who believe the Navy has gone too far with gender integration. They see themselves as guardians of military effectiveness, protecting the service from what they consider political correctness. They're concentrated in certain commands, certain geographic areas. Norfolk is one of their strongholds." Sarah absorbed this information, comparing it to Jennifer's data. "What can be done about it?" Torres was quiet for a moment, considering her response. "The official channels, equal opportunity complaints, inspector general reports. They can work, but they're slow and they often result in the complainant being marginalized." She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a contact entry. "There's someone I want you to meet. Retired Admiral Patricia Williams. She's been fighting this battle for 20 years, first as an active duty officer, now as an advocate for military personnel reform." But this, Sarah recognized the name. Admiral Williams had been one of the first women to achieve flag rank in the Navy, and her retirement had been surrounded by rumors of conflicts with senior leadership over gender integration policies. She knows about this network. She's been quietly documenting cases like yours, building evidence for eventual action. But she needs more current examples, more detailed documentation. Torres wrote down a phone number and slid it across the table. "Call her. Tell her I referred you. She can explain options you probably haven't considered." As Sarah walked back to her car, she felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. The situation was more complex than she had initially realized. She wasn't just facing individual discrimination, she was uncovering a systematic effort to limit female advancement in the Navy. That evening, she called Admiral Williams. "Commander Mitchell, Rebecca Torres told me to expect your call. I understand you've had an encounter with Admiral Burke." Williams' voice carried authority and warmth in equal measure. Sarah found herself explaining not just her own experience but also Jennifer's research and the evidence they had gathered. "Commander, what you're describing fits a pattern I've been tracking for several years. Burke is part of what we call the Old Guard Network, senior officers who believe gender integration has weakened military effectiveness." Williams explained that the network operated through informal channels, sharing information about female officers under consideration for promotion and coordinating efforts to limit their advancement. The challenge is that they're careful to frame their objections in terms of military readiness rather than gender. It's difficult to prove discrimination when the language sounds professionally appropriate. Sarah asked about legal options and formal complaint procedures. Those paths are available, but they're dangerous for the complainant. Officers who file discrimination complaints rarely survive professionally, even when they win. The institution has ways of marginalizing troublemakers. Williams paused, then continued with a different tone. "But there's another approach we've been considering. Something that might be more effective and less personally destructive." She explained that a group of retired senior officers had been developing a comprehensive report on gender discrimination in military promotion systems. The report would be released publicly, generating media attention and congressional pressure for reform. "What we need are current, detailed examples. Cases like yours that demonstrate the ongoing nature of the problem. Officers willing to go on record with their experiences." And Sarah felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Going public would certainly end her Navy career, but it might also create change that would benefit future female officers. Admiral, I need to understand all the implications before I make a decision. This isn't just about my career. It could affect other people I care about. Williams understood. Take your time, Commander, but understand that while you're deciding, other women are facing the same discrimination. Every promotion board that meets, more careers get derailed. After the call, Sarah sat in her apartment staring at the documents spread across her table. She had enough evidence to trigger a major investigation, maybe even congressional hearings. But using that evidence would mean sacrificing her own career and potentially damaging the Navy she had served faithfully. She thought about her conversation with her mother, about the female officers whose careers had already been destroyed, about future generations of women who might face the same barriers. The decision was becoming clearer, even though the consequences remained frightening. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing a detailed statement, documenting her experience with Admiral Burke and connecting it to the broader pattern of discrimination Jennifer had uncovered. She was crossing the point of no return, but she was doing it with purpose and determination. The next morning would bring new challenges and difficult conversations, but for the first time since her meeting with Burke, Sarah felt like she was taking positive action rather than simply reacting to events. She had found her path forward, even though she couldn't yet see where it would lead. The Pentagon conference room was imposing in its sterile formality. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Virginia countryside, while portraits of former secretaries of defense gazed down from mahogany-paneled walls. Commander Sarah Mitchell sat at a long table facing a panel of 5 admirals, including Admiral Burke, whose confident smirk had barely wavered since the proceedings began. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah made her decision to go public with the discrimination evidence. Admiral Williams had moved quickly, organizing a formal hearing before the allegations could be buried in bureaucratic processes. The media attention had been intense but carefully managed, with the focus remaining on systemic issues rather than individual accusations. Now, in this sterile Pentagon conference room, Sarah faced the most important moment of her career. The panel included Admiral Margaret Hayes as the presiding officer, Admiral James Sullivan from the Chief of Naval Operations Staff, Admiral Robert Chen from Navy Personnel Command, Admiral Burke representing the Norfolk Command, and Admiral Patricia Williams, who had come out of retirement to serve on the panel. Admiral Hayes called the hearing to order with crisp efficiency. This hearing is convened to examine allegations of systematic gender discrimination in Navy promotion processes. Commander Mitchell, you have requested the opportunity to present evidence and testimony. You may proceed. Sarah stood, her hands steady despite the magnitude of the moment. She had spent weeks preparing for this confrontation, knowing it would determine not just her own future, but potentially the future of female advancement in the Navy. Thank you, Admiral Hayes. I appear before this panel not as a disgruntled officer seeking personal vindication, but as a representative of numerous female officers who have faced systematic discrimination in promotion processes. She activated a presentation screen and displayed the first slide, showing promotion statistics by gender across different commands. The numbers spoke for themselves. Female officers were being promoted at significantly lower rates in certain areas of command. The data shows clear patterns of discrimination, but what the numbers cannot convey is the personal impact of this systematic bias. Sarah clicked to the next slide, showing individual case studies. These are the stories of decorated officers whose careers have been derailed by subjective evaluations that hold women to different standards than their male counterparts. Admiral Burke shifted in his chair, his expression showing irritation rather than concern. Sarah noticed his reaction and continued with growing confidence. I want to focus on a specific example that illustrates the broader pattern. My own experience with Admiral Burke, which led me to investigate these systematic issues. The room fell silent as Sarah recounted her meeting with Burke 3 weeks earlier. She described his repeated questions about her elimination count, his dismissive attitude toward her qualifications, and his explicit statement that her lack of combat kills disqualified her for promotion. Admiral Burke, she said, turning to face him directly, you asked me 4 times about my personal elimination count. You stated that officers without confirmed kills lacked the necessary understanding for senior command. You suggested that my record, despite 12 years of exemplary service, was insufficient for promotion to captain. Burke's smirk faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. Commander Mitchell, I evaluate all officers based on their readiness for increased responsibility. Combat experience is one important factor in that evaluation. Admiral, I've reviewed promotion records for male officers under your command over the past 3 years. Of the 23 male officers promoted to captain during that period, 7 had 0 confirmed eliminations in direct combat engagement. Their records show similar service patterns to mine: support roles, administrative excellence, strategic planning expertise. She displayed a detailed comparison chart showing parallel service records between male officers who had been promoted and female officers who had been denied. The similarities were striking, making Burke's different treatment of her case undeniable. Admiral Hayes studied the chart with obvious interest. Commander Mitchell, how did you obtain access to these detailed personnel records? Sarah had anticipated this question and had prepared her answer carefully. Admiral, this information was compiled from publicly available promotion announcements, official service records accessible through proper channels, and voluntary cooperation from officers willing to share their experiences. She deliberately avoided mentioning Jennifer Walsh's involvement, protecting her friend from potential retaliation. The information she was presenting was accurate, but she had been careful to obtain it through legitimate means. Admiral Burke leaned forward, his diplomatic mask slipping. Commander, you're cherry-picking data to support a predetermined conclusion. The officers you're comparing to yourself may have other qualifications that justified their promotions. Such as? Sarah asked, directly. Burke hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with being questioned so directly by a subordinate officer. Combat leadership experience, field command time, specialized training, numerous factors that don't appear in simple statistical comparisons. Sarah clicked to her next slide, which broke down the specific qualifications Burke had mentioned. Admiral, I've analyzed those factors as well. Female officers denied promotion actually score higher on average in specialized training, advanced education, and administrative excellence. The primary differentiator in evaluation reports is the emphasis placed on direct combat experience. She turned to address the full panel. The question before this board is whether direct combat eliminations should be the primary or exclusive criterion for senior naval command, and whether that criterion is being applied equally to all candidates. Admiral Sullivan spoke for the first time. Commander Mitchell, are you suggesting that combat experience is irrelevant to naval command? Sarah had expected this question and had prepared a nuanced response. Not at all, Admiral. Combat experience is valuable and important. However, modern naval operations require diverse skill sets including strategic planning, technological expertise, diplomatic capabilities, and personnel management. An officer's worth should be measured by their contribution to mission success, not solely by their personal elimination count. She clicked to a slide showing mission success rates for various operations. The data shows that mixed-gender leadership teams actually perform better on average than homogeneous teams. Diverse perspectives and skill sets contribute to more effective decision-making and better operational outcomes. Admiral Burke's patience was clearly wearing thin. Commander, you're turning this hearing into a sociology seminar. The Navy's mission is to fight and win wars, not to conduct social experiments. Sarah seized on his response. Admiral Burke, that statement perfectly illustrates the bias I'm describing. You characterize gender equality as a social experiment rather than recognizing it as effective utilization of qualified personnel. The tension in the room was palpable. Admiral Williams, who had remained quiet throughout the exchange, finally spoke. Admiral Burke, could you explain your evaluation methodology for determining combat readiness in officer candidates? Burke straightened, clearly more comfortable addressing a fellow admiral. Admiral Williams, I assess officers based on their demonstrated ability to make life-and-death decisions under pressure. Combat experience provides crucial insights into the realities of warfare that cannot be obtained through training or simulation. Williams nodded thoughtfully. And how do you weigh combat experience against other qualifications such as strategic planning, personnel management, and operational excellence? Combat experience is fundamental. Other qualifications are important but secondary to the basic requirement of proven leadership under fire. Williams asked her follow-up question with deceptive casualness. Admiral Burke, How many of the male officers you've promoted to captain in the past 3 years have personally eliminated enemy combatants in direct engagement? The question hung in the air like a bomb. Burke realized he had been maneuvered into a corner. If he admitted that male officers had been promoted without combat eliminations, he would expose the double standard Sarah was alleging. If he claimed they all had combat experience, he could be contradicted by the record she had already presented. Admiral Williams, the specific details of individual service records are confidential personnel matters. Williams smiled coldly. Admiral Burke, Commander Mitchell has already presented data showing that 7 of your male promotion candidates had 0 confirmed eliminations. Are you disputing that data? The comparison is inappropriate. Male officers bring different qualities to leadership roles. They have different perspectives on combat and command. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Burke had finally said what everyone knew he believed, that male and female officers were fundamentally different, and that difference justified discriminatory treatment. Admiral Hayes intervened. Admiral Burke, could you clarify what you mean by different perspectives? Burke realized his mistake but couldn't retreat from it. Male officers have traditionally demonstrated greater aptitude for combat leadership roles. This isn't discrimination, it's recognition of inherent differences and capabilities. Sarah felt a surge of triumph. Burke had just admitted to exactly the kind of thinking that constituted illegal discrimination. He had revealed his belief that gender determined capability, regardless of individual qualifications or performance. Admiral Burke, Sarah said quietly, you've just stated that male officers have inherently greater aptitude for combat leadership. That assumption is the foundation of the discrimination I've documented. Burke realized he had been trapped, but his anger overcame his caution. Commander Mitchell, I've served this Navy for 35 years. I've seen combat in 3 different conflicts. I've commanded ships, submarines, and carrier battle groups. I understand what it takes to lead in wartime. He stood, pointing at Sarah with barely controlled rage. You've never fired a shot in anger. You've never watched your sailors die because of your decisions. You've never felt the weight of command when lives hang in the balance. Yet you have the audacity to sit here and lecture me about naval leadership? The room fell completely silent. Burke's outburst had revealed the full extent of his contempt for female officers and his belief that they were inherently unqualified for senior command. Admiral Hayes spoke with ice-cold authority. Admiral Burke, you will return to your seat and conduct yourself appropriately, or you will be removed from these proceedings. Burke sat down, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He had just destroyed his own credibility in front of a panel of his peers. Sarah seized the moment. Admirals, what you've just witnessed illustrates exactly the problem I've documented. Admiral Burke's evaluation of my qualifications wasn't based on my record, my capabilities, or my potential contributions to the Navy. It was based on his assumption that female officers are inherently less capable than male officers. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a projection of future Navy leadership demographics. If current promotion patterns continue, female officers will remain severely underrepresented in senior command positions, despite comprising nearly 20% of the officer corps. This represents a massive waste of talent and capability. Admiral Sullivan asked, Commander Mitchell, what do you recommend as remedial action? Sarah had prepared for this question extensively. I recommend 3 immediate actions. First, standardized evaluation criteria that are applied equally to all promotion candidates, regardless of gender. Second, bias training for senior officers involved in promotion decisions. Third, regular statistical monitoring to identify and correct discriminatory patterns. She paused, then continued with the most important point. But beyond procedural changes, we need cultural change. We need senior leaders who recognize that diversity of background and experience strengthens rather than weakens our military effectiveness. Admiral Hayes looked around the table at her fellow panel members. Are there any additional questions for Commander Mitchell? Admiral Chen, who had remained silent throughout the hearing, finally spoke. Commander, you understand that bringing these allegations forward will likely end your Navy career, regardless of the outcome of this hearing. Yes, Admiral, I understand that. But I also understand that staying silent would mean allowing systematic discrimination to continue. The Navy I've served for 12 years is better than that. and it deserves better from its leaders. Admiral Hayes nodded with what might have been approval. This hearing will recess while the panel deliberates. Commander Mitchell, you and Admiral Burke will be notified of our findings within 48 hours. As the panel filed out, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had said what needed to be said, presented the evidence that needed to be heard, and forced a confrontation that had been brewing for years. Admiral Burke approached her as she gathered her materials. His earlier rage had been replaced by a cold, calculating expression. Commander Mitchell, you may think you've won something here today, but you've made a serious mistake. The Navy doesn't forget officers who attack their superiors. Your career is over, and you've probably destroyed the careers of anyone who helped you. Sarah looked at him calmly. Admiral, my career may be over, but the principle I've defended will survive. Future female officers will benefit from what happened here today, even if I don't. Burke's smile was cruel. We'll see about that, Commander. Change comes slowly in the Navy, and there are more of us than there are of you. As he walked away, Sarah realized that the confrontation was far from over. She had won this battle, but the war for gender equality in the military would continue long after her own career ended. 2 days later, Admiral Hayes called with the panel's decision. The investigation would be expanded to include other commands and additional cases. Admiral Burke would be relieved of his position and reassigned to administrative duties pending further investigation. Sarah would receive a formal apology, and her promotion to captain would be reconsidered by an independent board. But more importantly, the Navy would implement systematic changes to promotion procedures, including standardized evaluation criteria and regular monitoring for discriminatory patterns. 6 months later, Sarah stood on the bridge of the USS Constitution as its new commanding officer, having been promoted to captain in a ceremony that received national media attention. Admiral Burke had quietly retired rather than face formal charges, and several other officers had been transferred or disciplined. The changes hadn't come easily, and Sarah knew they wouldn't be permanent without constant vigilance. But as she looked out at the horizon, she felt pride not just in her own achievement, but in the knowledge that future female officers would face fewer barriers to advancement. The Admiral had smirked and asked about her kills, expecting to expose what he saw as her fundamental inadequacy. Instead, he had exposed his own bias and triggered the beginning of real change in the Navy's promotion system. Sarah's real victory hadn't been in getting promoted. It had been in proving that courage didn't require killing, that leadership wasn't determined by gender, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with weapons, but with truth.